So I saw this TikTok going around where this dude talks about how Zidane is incredibly overrated.
Zidane is the most overrated player in the history of the game. How he actually played versus how he's perceived couldn't be further apart.
And there's some stuff in here I completely disagree with. I think this dude kind of talks out of his butt and leaves out a lot of important context. However, there are also some harsh truths in here, flaws that Zidane definitely had as a player that I think a lot of people either ignore or don't know about. But this dude's first few points really lack nuance and context, so I'm going to defend Baldy for a bit before I attack him. So let's just go through his points one by one and determine whether or not Zidane's overrated, and if so, by how much.
How he actually played versus how he's perceived couldn't be further apart. His trophy haul is weak. 3 league titles, 1 Champions League, 0 domestic cup, playing for 2 Real Madrid and Juventus super teams. I'm sorry, but that's not GOAT level.
Okay, some big claims already. I think calling Zidane's trophy haul weak is a bit of a stretch. I mean, firstly, quite simply, he won literally everything a player dreams to win. A World Cup, a Euros, Champions League, and 3 league titles in top-class leagues. Also, he played for like Cannes and Bordeaux until he was 25, so it wasn't like he played for super teams his entire career. Yes, given the teams he played for, he could have won more, but keep in mind he also played in an era where the gap between the top teams and the rest wasn't as big as it is today. Like, just look at the points tallies the top teams have been hitting recently, like Liverpool and City over the last 5-10 years. Like, they both hit 97 plus in one season. City had another season with 100 points. Liverpool had one with 99. Like, 90 points used to be seen as like this hallmark of a generational team, and in recent years these juggernauts have just been breezing past that mark and hitting virtually 100 points like it was nothing. And that's before talking about the freaks in Real Madrid and Barcelona. Like, the modern super teams are just a different breed in terms of how dominant they are. I mean, financial inequality has grown. Just how elite talent was spread used to be very different. Like, take Francesco Totti, who was an unbelievable player. He spent his entire career at Roma. You don't really see that kind of thing these days. Also, how tactics have evolved, how refined build-up is now, how much control and dominance the top teams have, and the amount of goals like the top teams score today. Like, the norms have just changed. Basically, in simple terms, from the 2010s onwards, there was a bigger gap between the best teams and the rest than there were in previous decades in general terms. So to heavily criticize this trophy haul feels like almost a distortion of modern standards, and it just doesn't really apply. Now, that's not to downplay how strong Real Madrid and Juve were when Zidane joined them. They were incredibly strong. Like, when he joined Real Madrid, they were Spanish champions, they won the Champions League the year before, and 2 years before that, they were basically the best club in the world. So underachieved a bit? Yeah, that's completely fair. Does that mean his trophy haul is weak though? No, not for me.
He was wildly inconsistent. Madrid fans used to joke that Zidane wore the number 5 because he was half as good for them as he was for France. It's well documented that they never saw Zidane at his best. When he announced he was going to end his career by playing for France at the 2006 World Cup, he said, "It's been 2 years now that I haven't been playing like I want to." At Juventus, he once went 8 months without scoring, culminating in him being booed by his own fans. His coach, Carlo Ancelotti, straight up said that Zidane had had a terrible 1-year period. When Del Piero tore his ACL in 1998, Zidane became the team's focal point, his chance to shine. Instead, Juventus finished 7th, with Zidane managing a disappointing 2 goals and 3 assists.
Okay, I've seen this inconsistency thing thrown at Zidane quite a bit. And look, I think there are some nuggets of truth in here. Like, a lot of Madrid fans do seem to think Zizou's prime was in the 90s with Juve. Funnily enough, a lot of Juve fans don't think they saw the best of him either. Truth is, he shined most of all with France. But I don't think he was inconsistent, and here's why. I think what's happened is there's a discrepancy between the highest level Zidane would occasionally show that sticks in a lot of people's minds and what his actual average level was. But that doesn't make him inconsistent. He was on average week in, week out pretty good. He wasn't fluctuating from like completely crap to incredible. I think because he would occasionally have an insane game or have like these insane moments where he looks like a god, people think that he did that all the time or that he should do that all the time. And I'm not sure why that is. Maybe it's because he's a midfielder, or it seems like it just comes so naturally and easily to him. But like when Rooney scores a bicycle kick or scores from the halfway line, people don't call him inconsistent because he didn't do it every week, you know? Now, Zidane did have certain stretches in his career where he was bad. Like his last couple years at Madrid, yeah, it wasn't great. And I've heard that he had about a year at Juve where he was really poor. Now, I'll be honest, I haven't personally corroborated this. Like, I'm not going to watch 30 full games of grainy Serie A footage from the 90s just to confirm Zidane was crap in that 1 year period. What I will say is, I've watched quite a bit of Zidane's career overall over the years, and for the most part, he seemed to play pretty well. Occasionally, he'd have a great game, and occasionally, he'd have a stinker, like most other players. Now, let's assume what this guy said is true, and he had a horrible 12 months at Juve. That's still pretty normal to have like a couple of bad periods in an entire career. This happens to virtually everyone. Even Messi was below his standards at PSG. Now, I haven't personally seen with my eyes anything to suggest that Zidane was actually vastly more inconsistent than other great players. However, I do think Zidane's skill set and profile is pretty misunderstood, which might contribute to this perception of inconsistency, and I think does actually make him a bit overrated.
What did he actually do? Not a prolific goal scorer, not a top tier playmaker, not a controller of games. He had elite technique and a mesmerising first touch, but after the fancy control, what happened? This is an attacking midfielder who played between the lines for several super teams and a succession of top class forwards. Yet he isn't particularly effective at hitting a delicate pass in between the lines, nor did he develop a great partnership with any of his forwards. It's crazy to me that he only assisted Thierry Henry twice in his entire career.
Okay, saying what did he actually do is a bit mad, but all that I think was way harsher, but much more fair criticism than everything that came before. There's definitely some truth in what he just said. There are clear weaknesses in Zidane's game that doesn't often get talked about. But I'll push back and refine a bit on this guy's statement on Zidane's playmaking.
Not a prolific goal scorer, not a top tier playmaker.
I think Zidane was a great playmaker, but he wasn't a great chance creator, if that makes sense. Like, he didn't have a consistently elite final pass, like Ozil or De Bruyne or Messi. Hell, I can keep naming names. Ronaldinho, Rui Costa, Gerrard, Scholes, Xavi, Pogba. Like, they all had a much better final ball, whether that's the weight of their pass or their range, whatever. Man, I just thought of more. Fabregas, how did I forget him? Laudrup. I mean, there's probably a bunch of names I'm even forgetting now. But this dude's right in that Zidane wasn't top tier when it comes to like slipping in that final ball. But Zidane was a great playmaker because of how he could evade pressure, how he could dominate like a 5-yard zone around him. And then he had like these clever little moves, like these inventive back heels and stuff that just ways of manipulating the situation that would change the angle of an attack. So I don't think you should like dismiss his playmaking this way. It was still great, despite the fact that he wasn't one of the very best chance creators. Like retaining possession, progressing the ball, bringing others into play, that's all part of it as well. And I don't quite agree with how flippant this guy is about Zidane's fancy touch. But having such good control means that you can create advantageous situations where other players can't. And that 5-yard zone of dominance I talked about, he was one of the absolute best at that. It was unreal at times. And look, he wasn't an awful chance creator, just clearly not amongst the very best. Now I will say that how he played definitely came with drawbacks. Like for example, to be effective, he had to see the ball a lot. And you kind of had to play at his pace. Like he could be this incredible dominating force, but that also came with some negatives. Like if the team needed something a bit different, something more penetrative, or if he was just having a bad game, then the team would feel it. And look, his decision making also just wasn't as clean as someone like Xavi or Bergkamp, who always picked out the right pass at the right time with the right weight. He was more individualistic and he would sometimes run down blind alleys and stuff. On the transition, on the counter, he didn't offer as much as other midfielders have done. Not just because of his sub-elite final ball, although that definitely played a part, but also he quite simply just didn't have the legs of a Kaká or De Bruyne. Don't get me wrong, Zidane in his prime was a very good athlete. He had a really nice little burst. He could certainly help the ball along in these transition moments in a positive way, but he didn't have great top speed. He very rarely broke through the last line of defense, either on the ball or off it. Even take players like Lampard or Fabregas, who weren't great athletes by any means, they still offered a threat vertically through their passing and with their off-the-ball runs. I don't know if they just had like more power in their legs or they were just more willing to do it, but Zidane did not have that dimension to his game. And this is the big thing with Zidane, is that for all his fanciness, his lack of actual threat is kind of appalling. I've never seen anyone else get this much hype for being so relatively ineffective in the final third. Now, again, that sounds like really harsh for me, but bear in mind, I'm holding him to like absolute GOAT level standards, like one of the top 5 players of the last 30 years, which he's often hailed as, you know? Actually, what am I saying? It's not uncommon for people to say that he's one of the top 3 players ever in history.
I'd probably say Zidane for me as well has to be up there. I thought he was amazing.
Number 1 for me would be Messi. Maradona, just what he did in '86. And I'd agree with Roy, I would go Zidane of sort of the modern generation.
And that's when I feel like it just goes way too far. Like, this is not a Messi, Maradona level type of player, like, at all. And it's not even necessarily about like GA numbers specifically. Like, those guys were just bigger threats, even when they weren't scoring and assisting.
It's crazy to me that he only assisted Thierry Henry twice in his entire career. He was a number 10, playing with great players, but never truly elevating them.
The funny thing is, even the 2 assists he gave Henry were kind of fluky as well. Okay, fluky is not exactly the right word, but like the first one was against Denmark at the Euros, and it was a fine pass, but one you'd basically expect a good player to make. And then Henry on the counter just sprinted from the halfway line with the ball. Just no one could get near him, no one could catch him, and he scored. This wasn't like some goal-scoring opportunity that Zidane's vision created. This was like 95% just Henry being faster than everyone else on the pitch. And the second assist against Brazil in 2006, Zidane whips in a free kick, and Roberto Carlos was like, I don't know, tying his shoelaces off in La La Land somewhere. Henry snuck in behind and got contact with the ball. Not what you'd consider like a typical playmaker's assist. And look, Henry and Zidane's games didn't gel super well in my opinion. This has been kind of touched on by others, but I think the way Henry describes Bergkamp's game can illustrate why maybe Zidane could be a little bit frustrating. I've seen quite a few interviews over the years where Henry uses this turn of phrase for Bergkamp, that he always did what the game was asking him to do. What I think he means is there were no additional twirls that were unnecessary, no random bells and whistles for no reason. He always tried to do what was the most efficient thing for the team in that moment. And he had the fundamentals to basically execute anything you possibly need in a game of football. That's not to say he didn't do beautiful things, because he obviously did, but it was like that beauty was just a byproduct of him being as efficient as possible. And in some ways, maybe a player like Zidane is maybe even more of a genius, but yeah, there were frustrating elements to him. Even in that famous Brazil game, there were a few occasions where Zidane could have played Henry through, and he just either messed it up or just didn't do it. Oh, great skills, Zidane. Try and play Henry through. Yeah, any moment, just slip him in. Okay, now Henry's offside. Bad wavelengths. Hold on. Maybe Henry's fault. Okay, why did he just chip the ball onto Lucio's head? Oh, quick turnover. Lucio's out of position. Henry's in space. 1v1 on his favorite left-hand side. What the hell was that? Like, look at Henry. The dude's frustrated. You know, Dennis Bergkamp isn't going to try and Trivela it to no one there. Like, if that's Fabregas in Zidane's position, or Xavi, then Henry's getting that ball 10 out of 10 times. Even some less talented players would easily make that pass. Look, there's even more examples I can show, but editing this to get around copyright is so annoying. Henry absolutely rinsed Cafu once that game. If Henry just got the chance to run at him like a few more times, France could have won this like 3-0. No, sometimes he'll just be like infinitely twirling with it on the halfway line. And sometimes watching it, I'm just like, bro, stop twerking there and just like pass the ball forward, please. But I will say, Henry's not completely blameless here either. I think Zidane preferred a more typical number 9 to play with him, someone who would stay more central, more willing to hold the ball up and like play 1-2s, because Zidane was great at that. Henry liked to roam, use his mobility, run at players over and over, and he barely got to do that a lot with France. Maybe he just couldn't adapt his game quite enough and become great enough at it to really flourish with a player like Zidane. I mean, I say that, but they won a World Cup, won a Euros together when they were both fantastic, and got to another World Cup final. End of the day, these are two of the best players of all time, and they weren't unsuccessful. And look, there are certainly a couple of moments where Henry missed good chances himself that could have been assists for Zidane, but I do feel that Henry would have preferred someone like a Bergkamp or a Fabregas or even a Ronaldinho to play with him in the national team. Okay, and something important this guy hit on is Zidane played with unbelievable teammates. Like, people say he carried France, and I think that is so disrespectful to what was such a great team, full of players who were amongst the best in history in their positions. I mean, sure, over that period, if you had to pick a main man, it would be Zidane. But like, take Euro 2000, which is often said to be Zizou's best tournament, which I think it was as well, but Henry was legitimately about as good, basically. Like, he won man of the match 3 times, including the final, and he absolutely ripped through defenses throughout.
Henry, they'll be frightened of him now. There'll have been European footballers all around the continent thinking, please don't ask me to mark him. Is he the hottest striker around right now? It's hard to say that Thierry Henry is not.
Henry is the one person here on the French side who looks as though he's got enough artillery to trouble the Italians.
This is the man the Italians say they fear. It's Thierry Henry.
He really is a fantastic threat for them. Just such a great get out all the time as well with that pace.
But Henry is terrifying them with his pace at the moment.
And I mean, forget Henry. That Euro 2000 France team was one of the best teams ever, club or country. Vieira and Thuram had some absolutely monstrous games. Trezeguet coming off the bench. They were pretty damn stacked. Now, maybe the one thing they were lacking in their talent pool in that generation was truly creative midfielders. Like, Vieira and Makelele were absolute top-class midfielders, but they were not that profile. So I feel like Zidane's importance is a little bit inflated because the team was basically completely built around him and his strengths, and really there was no one else like him.
His World Cup legacy is overhyped. 1998, red card in the group stages, does nothing until the final, and then scores 2 headers from corners.
Wait, sorry, do headers from corners not count? Like, why did he throw that in like that, so like a negative? Also, yes, he got sent off and missed games, but did nothing until the final? My spidey senses, my vibes are telling me that he probably did more than nothing. And I've seen a compilation of his game against Brazil in the final, and he seemed really, really good. But I will say, the fact that France won the 2 games while Zidane was suspended, I think does emphasize just how good the team was overall.
2002, group stage exit.
Okay, this is just insanely unfair. Like, Zidane was basically injured that tournament. Like, he missed the first 2 games through injury, and he did play the last game, but I think he was rushed back, and Henry was suspended, and Pires was injured, which at that point was actually a really big deal. He was arguably seen as France's best player in that sort of 01-02 time.
It was cruelly cut short, but a breathtaking season. The footballer of the year. And they pay homage, his teammates.
Well, he done his cruciate just before the World Cup.
Yeah,
Couldn't
yeah.
go with France. And at the time, in France, at that time, with the year he's just had, people were actually more gutted to lose Robert than Zidane. He was above Zidane at the time in France. Like
'cause he was
everybody was just
doing
like, oh my
everything.
God.
Anyway, these were big losses, and Henry was expected to carry, which is still used as a stick against him today, which I think a little unfairly, because the team was just kind of dysfunctional. You certainly can't pin it on Zidane like he was some bum.
2006, besides the Brazil game, he was carried by an electric Ribéry and an elite defense.
Okay, now I do think Zidane's 2006 World Cup is overrated, but saying Ribéry carried them is mad. Ribéry was like a nice bright spark, especially in the group stages, but his tournament also kind of petered out. Like, it was a nice breakout tournament for a young up-and-coming player. Far from anything crazy, he didn't carry hard or anything. Henry and Zidane, the two big stars, they started off quite poorly. They were not great in the group stages, although Henry did score 2 important goals. Zidane was okay against Spain in the round of 16, where he scored a goal at the end. But from the quarterfinals onwards, I think those two completely took over and had very good tournaments. They were both excellent against Brazil and Portugal. Zidane maybe shone a little bit more in those two games, but in the final against Italy, I think Henry was the best, especially in the second half. He was the only one really scaring the Italians. But look, Zizou's big moment was the game against Brazil, and everyone was so hyped because this is his last tournament, and his touches were so incredible and stuff. And I think it basically inflated Zidane's tournament to being like this all-timer level, when I don't really think it was. I think it was very good overall, but maybe not at the level that people seem to rate it at. Look, I think this TikToker guy is a bit of a troll. I think he's mostly just stirring shit or like lazily regurgitating something he heard once. But there were some stuff he said here that had like certainly nuggets of truth. My conclusion is I think Zidane is a little bit overrated. I think he's possibly the best midfielder of all time. I think he's in and around that conversation. But in terms of overall players, I think there have been at least 3 or 4 players in my lifetime just straight up better than him. And I know this is controversial, but I think Henry is one of them. I think he's just more likely to win you a game of football in all sorts of different scenarios. I think the likes of Neymar, Ronaldinho, obviously Messi were better too. And then I think there's a bunch of names who chat to him and you could argue about who's better. Frankly, I'm not entirely sure if Zidane's really any better than Bergkamp, for example, despite being held on a much higher pedestal. I think there's basically 2 reasons that Zidane is held up to this godly status that maybe he doesn't quite deserve. Despite being still a great player, I want to emphasize that he was absolutely a great player. He's definitely not a fraud, but I do think he's slightly overrated for 2 reasons. And firstly is because he's simply aesthetically unbelievable. He's beautiful to watch. And the second reason is kind of funny. I think basically 3 goals give him a huge lift to his legacy. 2 in the World Cup final and 1 in the Champions League final. I think if you're already hailed as like a great player, scoring in those moments will just give you like a huge PR and legacy boost. You take those 3 moments away, and would he really be considered as so much better than a Bergkamp or a Totti or even a Kevin De Bruyne? I'm really not sure. In a weird way, his Panenka and even a headbutt in the 06 final adds to that legacy because they're huge moments, even though he was pretty mediocre in that game. Alright, I guess that's it. Let me know your thoughts. Peace soup.